The Lord be with you. Almighty and everlasting God, we give you thanks for this day and for the gift of gathering together as a community of faith. As we reflect on the history of this sacred place, we are reminded of the generations who have come before us, those who built, cared for, and worshiped within these walls. Lord, we thank you for the beauty of Christ Church, not only in its architecture and art, but in the lives of its people, past and present, who have served as living stones in your holy temple. May our time together this morning inspire gratitude for what has been, a sense of wonder for what is, and hope for all that is to come. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Good morning. So happy to see all of you again this morning. We're getting down to it. The holidays are amongst us. Lots going on, so I appreciate you being here. We'll get a little dance. That's good. We'll get it. There we go. Our bicentennial year continues. We are just now a few short months from our actual anniversary on March 5th. I want to remind people that merchandise will be available both in the back after this session, as well as after church in the Herald House today, next Sunday, as well as after the Christmas Eve pageant service, the 4:30 service on Christmas Eve. So if you are needing any last-minute gifts, then come see us. One of those gifts should be our new coffee table book, which we released last week for pre-order. It is beautiful. It's 160 pages of wonderful historical photos, as well as new images and perspectives that you don't necessarily see the church from all the time. So make sure that you are getting one of those. You need one. Your spouse needs one. Your children need one. Your grandchildren need one to see where Gran went to church. Maybe your dog might need one. I don't know. So load up, right? They make wonderful Christmas presents. Even though the books aren't here, we have a great little card that you can give loved ones to say that you've ordered the book for them, and it'll be here in February. So make sure that you are getting on that before they sell out. Don't forget that tonight at 5:30 is Advent Lessons and Carols. It is going to be a particularly moody evening, as Jonathan has selected a liturgy that goes from darkness to light. So it will be a beautiful, beautiful service. I hope you all can be there. A couple of other things to put on your radar screen. In January, we are going to be having a cocktail party at Georgia and Bob Hatcher's house on the 23rd. That is going to be a bicentennial cocktail party, as well as a chance to preview the coffee table book and order if you haven't already.
You must be old enough to drink.
Do you have to be old enough to behave?
No, drink.
Just to drink, okay. That's good.
Not old enough to drink. What do you drink?
When is that cocktail party?
January 23rd. And then the following month, about a month later, on February 27th, we are having our big festival bicentennial celebration service. The bishop will be in town, former clergy will be in town, dignitaries will be here. It's a Thursday night. There's a large reception after the service. Make sure you get that on your calendar now, and I would suggest getting here early because we'll probably have an overflow situation. So get here early to get a good seat. Good. Let's see here. If I can remember how to use this. Our upcoming forums. Next month, Susan Welsh will join us for part 2 of the stained glass windows. Last month, she went over about half the windows. In January, she'll go over the other windows. In February, we will talk about the growth of our campus and how that's sort of changed over time, and look at some photos of some of the other buildings and learn a little bit more about the buildings that were here or are here. And then March will be our final forum, and I probably should have confirmed this before I put it on the slide. Maybe this will serve as confirmation. Nan Harper, I've asked Nan to consider doing the March session for us to maybe do it in the church about everything Altar Guild related. I think people would really enjoy learning a little bit more about all the vessels we use, the linens we use, why we use them, why we put them in certain orders and in certain places, and maybe show off our newly renovated sacristy to everyone. So I think that's what the March session will be. So let's go back, though, and review a little bit over everything that we've covered so far this year. We've gone through a lot. We've gone through the early history of the church, how the church was founded, the struggles it went through, how it eventually sort of persevered and grew. We've looked at lots of historical documents that established the church. We've looked at newspaper ads that promoted like the very earliest services of Christ Church that were in the newspaper. We've talked about the construction of our original building and then our current building in 1851. We've picked apart historical photos of the church to see how the curbs and the streetscape and the sidewalks sort of changed over time, and how everything sort of shifted. Then we turned our attention to our music program and all the wonderful organs that we've had, some of the wonderfully gifted musicians and choir members that we've had in our history, and then, like we talked about, Susan was here last month to start looking at our stained glass windows. Today we're going to focus on the interior of the church and how that has changed and evolved over the years. We'll highlight a few of the notable sort of additions and fixtures in the church as well. You will notice, if you haven't already, that there's a considerable amount of crossover between these forums, what you read in the bulletin in the Did You Know articles that we've done every week, as well as our coffee table book. You may not have realized it, but you've kind of been getting a slow little drip of a preview of some of the things that will be in our coffee table book through these forums. Some of you have been here a while at the church. Some of you are newer to Christ Church. Some of the things we'll see today will take some of you down memory lane, but others you'll be seeing pictures of the church in a way that you've never seen it before. So let's kind of get into it. We're going to start by revisiting very quickly our original church building that sat on the same site that our current church is on, just next door. I'm not going to go through the whole story and the stats and all of that. It was a small, modest building. This is one of Mrs. Baber's sketches that she did of the building. This is one of a series of sketches she did. They were each a little bit different from the others. But it was this super quaint church right next door, built in 1834. In keeping with the theme of today, with the interior evolution, this is the seating diagram from that original building. It really provides the best insight that we have in terms of what the layout of that building was. The building was originally just a little bit smaller or different than what you see here. This diagram goes back to around 1846. But in 1842, they had actually had to add additional pews. It's an odd number, but the history books say that they added 19 pews. That doesn't fit right with my mind. You would think it would be an even number to right, left. I don't know, but who knows? You will see that there are 7 pews here and 7 over here. And if you put 7 with maybe these 6 and that 6, you'd end up with 19. I don't know. I don't know which ones were added or not. But they added additional pews in 1842. They also added a bell tower, a belfry, and that was the first time that we had an actual baptismal font that was placed in the front of the church. Our current building, of course, was built in 1851, and as you may recall from one of our other forums, it was built using the architectural plans of another church that had been built in North Carolina a few years prior, First Baptist Church in New Bern, North Carolina. There are several differences between those two structures, but the similarities, I think, are pretty evident. William Johnston, who built what we now call the Hay House, paid for the plans, the architectural plans, to be altered for Christ Church's use and to make the church distinct from the other structure. He also paid for all the construction costs associated with making those changes. That was a very generous gift by him. A few years later, in 1855, of course, he began construction on his home. That lasted for a few years, finished in 1859. The architect that he used for his home, T. Thomas and Son, out of New York, is the same architectural firm that presented these plans to Christ Church. So you can kind of see how maybe his work with T. Thomas and Son to alter these plans may have instilled the confidence he needed to say, why don't you build my house as well? It is notable, I think, or interesting, that neither Christ Church nor William Johnston elected to use notable local architect Elam Alexander, which is interesting. Don't know the reason behind that, but I can only assume that the church decided to use these pre-existing architectural plans simply as a way to save money. It's certainly easier and cheaper to use plans that already exist, even though Mr. Johnston came along and altered them, than it was to have an architectural firm draw up completely new plans for us. That's an assumption, but probably a fair guess. The new building included a rear gallery, a rear balcony, just like the old building had, but it also included two side galleries, these galleries that ran the full length of the church. It is somewhat unsettling to think about today, but those galleries, those balconies were reserved for enslaved persons, servants, and other guests who attended church. The pews downstairs were rented by parishioners, just like pews in the original church had been. There are not any pictures of Christ Church with those side galleries in place. Cameras didn't exist at well, I guess they could have, but there's no pictures of the side galleries in Christ Church that are around. But it occurred to me that since Christ Church had been built using the same architectural plans as this other church had been, perhaps there were old pictures of First Baptist. Maybe First Baptist had side galleries as well. I don't know. So I called First Baptist. And First Baptist was able to provide this picture of the interior of their church with their side galleries. This is not a picture of Christ Church, but it is a picture of a church of the exact same dimensions, same architectural plans as Christ Church, with side galleries and beautiful stenciling. Now, First Baptist does not look like this anymore. They have changed their configuration of their pews and aisles to, guess what? A central aisle like we have, and they still have these two side doors and the doors right above in the balcony, very similar to what Christ Church has. Their doors are a little more central. Ours are out a little further. But this gives us a very good idea of what the side balconies would have looked like in Christ Church. It's amazing, I think. I just think it's spectacular. All I can think is that these columns that would have supported the balcony probably would have aligned with our pew dividers. That's my best guess. So when you go into church today and you kind of sit there, you can kind of imagine that half the church would have been undercover, so to speak, right? You can also imagine, though, that this made the church very dark. And you can see they have their windows on the sides, right? And what the balcony does to that, it just kind of hides the window. And so these side galleries were taken down in 1882 and 1883 during a major renovation. That renovation was almost as thorough as our 2000 renovation. Not quite, but almost. A lot happened in 1882. The side galleries were taken down to both brighten up and open up the space. But there's an interesting note in our history books about another reason the side galleries were taken down. It mentions that there had been some, I forget the exact phrase it uses, unruly or distracting visitors in the galleries. People were sort of coming into the church, these curious onlookers, and they were causing a bit of disruption to the services. I guess so often that they said, well, let's just get rid of the balconies. So they were taken down. Now let's turn our attention to what I think is the oldest photo of the interior of the church. You've seen this in a couple of our Did You Knows, I think, because there's a lot to look at in this picture. This photo dates to sometime between 1882, when these side windows were installed, and 1892, when we know that several other things in this picture changed, like the straight altar rail becoming a curved altar rail that we have today. So it's sometime between 1882 and 1892. It is clearly decorated, very clearly, for Easter with lots and lots of flowers. We just don't know what year it was. One of the most interesting things about the photo, I think, is that you can see some of the gas-fueled adornments that they had in the church at that time. And I've written about these in the bulletins. First up is this gigantic lantern or chandelier, for lack of a better term, that was gas-fueled, hanging above the church. And then this star that was mounted to this gas line that still runs above our chancel arch today. This star was fueled by gas, and you can still see on the back side of this line, if you turn around after you get communion, there's a little knob right there on the back of that line where this thing would have been attached. It was lit on fire right next to the ceiling. Right next to the ceiling at different points during the year, particularly during Advent. I can't fathom it. I don't know. Even worse, in my opinion, were these crowns of gas-fueled burners that were at the top, or at the top of each column. So if you look, in the larger picture right here, you have these burners that were literally like a crown around the top of the column. Same thing on the back of each column. Turn around after communion, and there's a little gas line stubbed out right there. Maybe we could hook them back up. If they're still active, we can still use those things. They're probably in storage somewhere. So it's sort of amazing that those were there. The other fascinating thing in this picture is, of course, the stenciling that was there all around. I've zoomed in a little bit to get a little bit more detail, and you see many similarities between these stencils and what we have now. This photo and some stenciling that they uncovered during the 1999 beginning of the renovation were the inspiration for the stenciling that we have now. And you can definitely see how some of it's right side up and some of it's sort of pointed down, just like kind of what we have today. Great. You can also see in this picture that our eagle lectern is in place at that point, as well as our bishop's chair in the back, which we still have in the chancel area today. But of course, the star of the photo is this large central window that was behind the altar. It's really one of the first things you notice in the photo. The window was geometric in design, just like all of the original windows in the church were. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see a little bit more of the detail of the window. There was a bit of a rose element at the top, and then you have these other, it was very symmetrical and very geometric. The window was eventually removed in 1957 after it fell into disrepair, both the window and the frame around it. So it had to be removed. The wall was bricked in, plastered over. The exterior wall was stuccoed over, and the window that was taken out was broken up into pieces. And some of you might be able to tell me this. It was either sold or just passed out as sort of souvenirs to parishioners. And so some people still have pieces of that glass window tucked away somewhere, which is kind of a neat keepsake. If you're curious about how large the window was, all you have to do is go out the door to my right, walk around here, and you can see the back side of the church, and there is the outline of that original central stained glass window. It was a large window, but that little detail continues to stare at us and educate us even to this day, now close to 70 years later. Let's fast forward a few years to March of 1925 and the elaborate decorations of our centennial celebration service, our 100th anniversary. This is Cynthia's favorite picture because she loves all of the decorations on the altar. Well, maybe. The first thing you notice in this picture is the addition of our large wooden rear doss and our current altar. Those have been added in 1905. But let's talk about those decorations. Dr. and Mrs. Baber's granddaughters were the ones who were responsible for decorating the church for this service. And each and every branch, flower, piece of greenery, or element was chosen very intentionally and very symbolically. Many of the pieces of greenery came from the garden from the Baber's home across the street, even though they weren't living there anymore. Some of them came from Dr. Baber's plot in Rosehill Cemetery, and the others were very deliberately chosen. There's a wonderful narrative that accompanies this photo that walks through the symbolism of each and everything in the photo. You also can't help but notice, and this is where I was sort of needling Cynthia, the flowered Masonic emblem on the altar, or on the rear doss, not on the altar. Not on the altar. This was a nod to the fact that the church had been founded at the Masonic Lodge in 1825. To go along with that, the Grand Master of the Masonic Temple or Masonic Lodge here in town, as well as a couple of other officers at that time, processed in the service in full Masonic regalia, and were noted in the bulletin and the program and that sort of thing for being dignitaries in attendance. I'm not sure that that's going to happen this February. I'm just picking up on some hints that have been dropped, but one of the last things to point out of this picture is the original tile floor that was there. That floor was installed in 1911. The tile floor that we have today is not that tile floor. It might look familiar because it inspired the tile floor that we have today. As you can see, our tile pattern mimics the original tile pattern. You can see this detail of the border is almost identical. You see the crosses. We have staggered them since. Before they were just in a grid, but very, very similar. And that was done clearly on purpose, intentionally, as a nod to our history. Our next photo. We can tell that this photo was taken sometime between 1911 and 1957. 1911 because the tile floor had been installed, and 1957 because the window was taken out in 57. So it's sometime between those points. We do see that we have the Kimball organ is in place because the organ pipes are on the left-hand side of the church here. And the choir had moved down front, which happened in 1908. That doesn't really help us date it. Interesting thing that you'll notice about the rear DOS is that it looks a little different than it does today. That's because it was originally flat across its top. It did not have the embellishment that it has today. The ornate embellishment was added in 1965 after they took out the large central window and plastered over that space. There was just a giant sort of blank space up there on the wall. And there was a preference to sort of fill that space a little bit if we could. And so the church contracted with a company out of London, the J. Whipple Company, to design and construct this decorative topper. They did a wonderful job, and I would challenge any of you to go next door and try to identify, if you hadn't seen those pictures, where the separation is, because it is a magnificently done job. And like with any quality work, it looks like it's always been there. And that's the way it's meant to be, right? Now, one interesting thing are these little spires that you see on the rear DOS and the embellishment. If you think those are just another decorative element, I present to you another possibility. I cannot tell you for certain that these are related. However, the designers of the rear DOS and then the designers of the embellishment, the topper, would have been very interested in connecting that piece to the church at large. So the similarities between our spires on top of our bell tower and these that were built into the rear DOS are striking. I can't confirm that it was intentional, but we'll just leave it at that. They're very similar. Back to the wide shot of the church. There's one other interesting thing to note in this picture, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to say that I just literally noticed it this week. I've looked at this picture probably 100 times over the last year, and I just noticed this detail this week. The window on the left side of the altar, the Alpha and Omega window, is open. See how it's tilted towards us? Now, if you go next door and you look at that window, and I've seen this before, there's two hinges on the window, on the lower rectangular sash. But I'd never noticed in a picture that it was actually opened. So that got me looking a little bit more. And then I found this other window, this other picture, that also shows that window open. This one's from 1923. I'm not sure when the last time it was that it was opened or when it was sealed. Certainly there are now plexiglass coverings on the back sides of the windows, so there wouldn't be any point to open it. But it's neat to see how functional it was. So it's crazy how when you're looking through these documents and these photos, the more you look and the more you pay attention, the more you notice. And I can't tell you that has been my experience time and time and time again over the last year and in working on the book and digging through the histories. And this was just a recent example. Literally this past week when I was getting ready for this forum, I was like, wait a second. Blew my mind. We also saw this photo during our music forum in October. This shows how the nave had to be altered when a new organ was installed, with the pipes going in on one side, the organ being installed there. It was a common sort of story that the installation of the organs and the location of the organs has driven a lot of interior design and aesthetics of the church over the years. This is after our Moeller organ was installed, with the addition of organ pipes on the other side as well. For those of you who weren't around then, there was a little door right here that led to the sacristy, right behind the, sort of go behind some of the pipes. You'll also notice, a discerning eye will notice that there's a window here that there's not right now. That's the window that now is in the rear left corner of the church, the Holy Family window, the blue window with three scenes, the Nativity, the Annunciation, and the Presentation. That was there and got moved back here in 2000. You might remember us talking about this in our music forum, but in 1957 we installed an antiphonal organ in the balcony. An antiphonal organ is a secondary set of organ pipes that would have been controlled by the organist up front at the console of the organ. This is a terrible photo. I apologize. This is the only copy of this photo I've seen, and it was a photocopy. It's a terrible copy. It did not make the cut for the coffee table book, I'm sad to say, because it's a gorgeous picture if we had a better quality of it. You see these organ pipes of the antiphonal organ in the balcony. They were accompanied by the largest painting and possibly, well, definitely one of the most valuable paintings that the church owns. However, when the Fisk organ was relocated to this space in 2000, these pipes came out and this painting had to go somewhere. But the painting was so large that there was really nowhere to display it here. This painting is one of several that were purchased by William Johnston and his wife Anne on their extended honeymoon. Their grand tour, as they called it, because it lasted for 3 years. She ended up getting pregnant while they were abroad as well. After their deaths, the Johnston home passed to their daughter and her husband, who had the last name Felton. So it became the Johnston-Felton home. After their death, their children chose to sell the home. They did not want to maintain the home because it was so expensive. They didn't want the space. They also chose to sell a lot of the furnishings and a lot of the artwork because where were they going to store it without this big house? Two brothers who were members of Christ Church, the Birdsey brothers, went and bought a lot of those paintings and then later donated them to Christ Church. Not only this painting in the photo here, but this painting here behind the screen, the ones over in the parlor, right out here by the stairwell, and maybe one or two in the Herald House, I'm not sure, are all original Johnston paintings. The church still owns this painting, but because we didn't have anywhere to store it, it is now on loan and on display at the Hay House. It is in their music room or their ballroom. It is in a different frame than it was originally in when it was at the church. The frame, it's hard to see in this photo, but it's a much grander, wider frame, much more ornate frame. But it was in very poor condition. So much so that the Hay House didn't want to display it in that frame. And so a new frame was added to it. The original frame is still owned by the church and is in storage. But it's a beautiful painting, and if you're ever at the Hay House, stop by to see it, and you can even see the little note to the left of it saying that's on loan from Christ Church. A lot of connections between the Hay House and Christ Church. Let's turn our attention now to our most recent renovation that occurred in 1999 and was finished in 2000. Many of you survived that process, mostly unscathed, but maybe a little more, I don't know, whatever. But it was quite the undertaking. It literally touched virtually every surface of the church. The list of things that were done as part of that project are too lengthy to name here. We would be here all day. As you can see in this photo, sacristies were reframed after organ pipes were removed. Various paint colors were explored with and experimented with before deciding what to do. Every wood surface in the church was stripped, resurfaced, restained, and even in some cases grained. All of the pews were removed. Outrageous scaffolding was erected all the way to the very top of the ceiling to allow for the stenciling and to make room for the construction crews and that sort of thing. These photos show a little bit more of that stenciling process. When was the last time you saw our walls bare? It's interesting to look at. Here you see the door, the new accessible door and entranceway that had been installed as part of the project. A worker high up above, probably beginning to lay out some stenciling. Plastic covering the chancel area just to protect surfaces, and it sort of looks like the tile floor had been installed at that point in that picture. Here's a great picture of the stenciling on the ceiling that was done that so often we don't look up and see. That's on every panel above our heads. A little bit farther along in the stenciling process, but they hadn't completed the stenciling. If you see, they kind of stopped here because they didn't want to get around the monument, the memorial just yet.
Russ, how long did that process take?
Somebody else would probably be better suited to answer that. My guess is it was about 18 months, 12 to 18 months. Yeah, started in 99, ended in 2000. Great Hall. Great Hall. This picture is neat because it shows how the floor and the chancel had been torn up to be prepared for the new tile floor. And here's a great picture of the Holy Family window still in its original location there. And you can see that I don't understand the whole stenciling process, but there's some sort of paper that's covering the walls, and that must have been like the stencil pattern or something. I'm not entirely sure, but that's super neat to kind of see and look at. It was also during this renovation that the altar was moved forward away from the rear dos. It used to be that the priest celebrated Eucharist facing away from the congregation, and there was a wide move nationally, maybe internationally, I don't know, of moving altars forward so that clergy could celebrate the Eucharist facing the congregation. And that happened during this renovation. But it's just so striking to see the church and such a familiar space for us with no pews and nothing on the wall. These are just very stark images to see. And I know those of you that participated in that process and were a part of that look back with fondness, maybe jaded fondness, I'm not sure, of having gone through that process, because it was a major undertaking and was really transformational for the church. And of course, the installation of the Fisk organ was sort of the crown jewel of that whole project. In our last sort of few minutes this morning, I want to go through some of the individual items that we look at in the church and see, just to talk a little bit about those. First up is our altar rail and our kneeling cushions. The cushions are really fascinating to me. They were completed by 5 or 6 women in the church in 1940. There are 29 individual panels that they sewed. Those panels represent a variety of different symbols. 12 of them are the symbols of the 12 individual apostles. Others are floral patterns, Christograms, and other Christian symbols. Tim did a wonderful YouTube video in August or September about these kneelers, and you really should go on there and watch it. There's two videos back to back, and he walks you through the meaning and symbolism of each individual panel down there on the cushions. It's just gorgeous. Altar rail is made of tiger oak and are supported by these beautiful brass supports that are done in a grapevine motif. The most impressive thing about those, other than how pretty they are and how detailed they are, is I'm always amazed at how the communion rail does not wiggle the slightest bit. Even though every week, how many people are putting their full weight on that thing when they stand up or kneel down, and it doesn't wiggle. It's amazing. So I'm not sure how long the screws are that are holding that thing in the floor, but it's pretty impressive. Next is our baptismal font. As I wrote in the Did You Know last month, this is actually the third baptismal font that Christ Church has had. Prior to our first one in 1842, the church used the silver bowl that's in the Baber Memorial in the nave. That was what they used for baptisms. But then in 1842, when we did that renovation of our first building or expansion, we got our first baptismal font. That font was replaced when we moved into the new building in 1852. The original font was given to St. Luke's in Hawkinsville at some point when that church was being founded. I have reached out to St. Luke's, and they have sent me a picture of their baptismal font, and it is a very pretty wooden font, and it's small. It is possible that that is our original font, but it has a plaque on it that it was given by someone and not by Christ Church. So I tend to think that their font is not ours. It was a wonderful thought, and I was hoping that they would still have our original font. That would be wonderful, but I don't think that that's what is there. In 1852, we got a new font, and then it was replaced by this font 30 years later in 1882 at Easter. The bowl in the 1852 font is in this font, and so there is still some connection to that original font. And as I wrote in that Did You Know article, a lot of people aren't aware, but many baptismal fonts are 8-sided, and that's very intentional. It is a reference to 1 Peter chapter 3, which references 8 people being saved through water. 8 is also the number of regeneration, and it refers to, in ancient Christian days, what they referred to as the 8th day, the day of Christ's resurrection, and the day that things were a new beginning being ushered in, the day that all things were made new again, just as we are through baptism. So you will often see baptismal fonts in the shape of an octagon with 8 sides. One of the most notable parts of our baptismal font, of course, is our iconic brass angel cover, which was installed in 1892. The angel holds a scroll in front of her with the Latin word renovator, inscribed on it. That word means to restore something to its original state. Again, a reference to the transformative power of baptism. It is both beautiful and poignant. The angel is so distinctive, especially in her location right inside the back door, it makes it all the more special. There are some stunning photos of the angel in our coffee table book. This one is blurry and out of focus and is not very good, but I didn't want to spoil the surprise of some of the others. They are gorgeous. But I hate to be the bearer of bad news on such a beautiful December morning. As much as we love our angel, she is not one of a kind. Her twin sister resides in Trinity Episcopal Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I'll give you one guess as to when their brass angel was installed. 1892, the same year ours was. You will see that their bases are very different. Theirs has this arched brass base, but from this point up, they are identical. It seems that Christ Church and Trinity must have been at the same liturgical furniture convention in 1892, or were paid a visit by the same door-to-door salesman selling lecterns. I'm not sure how he would have lugged those around. Kind of like the encyclopedia salesman, I guess. Their eagle lectern looks suspiciously familiar as well, doesn't it? Huh? I do think there are some differences with their lectern. Their eagle is not looking quite as upward as ours is, but the similarities, again, are evident. Our lectern is one of the very few things in our church that has no record of really when it was installed, who gave it, and was not given in the memory of anyone as best of that our records indicate. One of the only things I've come across that doesn't have some memorial attached to it. It is referenced in our 1884 history book as already being in place. I fully suspect that it was installed during the large 1882 renovation. The symbolism of eagle lecterns is profound. It's a very common form for lecterns. It is a reference to St. John the Evangelist, who began his gospel talking about the Word of God. And so it is an entirely appropriate symbol to stand behind as we read the Word of God today, the symbol of John. It is hand-carved from mahogany and is one of the more commanding features of the church. Now let's move across the chancel to our pulpit, which doesn't get enough attention, but it is a gorgeous piece that was installed around 1892. It is oak with these beautiful bronze panels underneath it. The left and right panels, this one and this one over here, feature the Alpha and Omega monograms, each centered in a barbed quatrefoil. Susan taught you guys about quatrefoils last time. And then the central panel features the Chi Rho Christogram surrounded by lilies. The pulpit was given in memory of Bishop Stephen Elliott, the first bishop of Georgia. He was a driving force in the growth of the Episcopal Church in Georgia and was beloved through the diocese. His death in 1866 was a blow to many in the state, and we installed the pulpit in his memory. You often can't see it, but right behind this hanging is a panel that says just that. To the glory of God and in memory of the Right Reverend Stephen Elliott, first Bishop of Georgia. As we wrap up our journey through time this morning, reflecting on the evolution of Christ Church's interior, I hope we will give thanks to this beautiful and sacred worship space that we share. It has not come to be this by accident. Generations of faithful Christ Church members have left their mark on this sacred space. The walls and pews and rafters echo with their voices and their influences. Multiple renovations have shaped the space into what it is today, and we are fortunate to have been left this legacy. It fosters not only a deep appreciation, I think, but also a sense of responsibility to preserve this place and even enhance it when we can, for future generations to worship, gather, and grow in their own faith. I thank you for being here. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you enjoyed all the photos. Next month, Susan Walsh will be back to talk about some more windows. And don't forget, Hope will be in the back to take coffee table book pre-orders. We'll also be in the Herald House after church taking orders. What time is it? Are we good on time? We're good. We're perfect.
Russ,
Great.
I want to say one
Yes,
thing.
ma'am.
The baptismal font has not always been in the center.
That's true.
It was way over to the right.
It was even in the front at one point. When it was first installed, it was up front, and then it got moved.
Then it was
Yep.
back on the right. all
The
while.
back right corner. That's right. Good point. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Order your books.